It's nice to know that good things tend to come along in more than singles when it comes to comic books. As a general rule of thumb, if a single issue of a story arc is bad, you can be assured that the rest of the story is going to be bad to mediocre as well. There are exceptions, of course, but it's a rather safe bet. Even with a comic that specializes in single issue stories like early Sonic comics, you can usually expect a sequence of issues to maintain a range of quality. The change in quality for the series in its early days is more like a bell curve than a mountain range. Thus, instilled with confidence after the quality of the last issue, I'm happy to say that we have another pretty good set of stories in issue 14 to take a look at. Starting with the cover, well, it's cute and kind of indicative of the main story, as it does star Tails. I do just love Sonic's disapproving look here, as if he's some sort of high ground moral authority. Not like going against authority and being a rebel was a selling point for his character or anything. We open on our first story, Tails' Taste of Power. Sounds kind of like it should be a chapter title in a George R.R. Martin story. Anyway, a quick zoom out, and oh goodness, it doesn't look good. Sonic is in the grip of a, frankly, freaky-looking flower holding Sonic close as Tails dashes forward, ready to assist his hero, but it turns out that Sonic's just fine despite the fact that all evidence in the previous panel points to otherwise. He was just watering a passion plant, and... passion plant, huh? Plants that get affection, long vines. This is dangerously close to turning into a tentacle hentai. Sonic explains that he was just watching Rotor's greenhouse while the walrus was out and about, and he'd agreed to water all the plants. Of course, manual labor is below Sonic's purview, so he immediately asks if Tails wants to take over this duty, and Tails confuses his request with him offering up position of the freedom fighters' leader. Rather presumptuous of you, Tails, especially since you haven't really done anything to warrant such a big head. Then again, you haven't really done much of anything since the comic started, save for that one where you got captured and almost blown up. Anyway, Tails accepts, and Sonic just zooms off. What a noble hero, dumping the menial tasks off on kids who look up to him. After a small bit of unwarranted self-depreciation, Tails notices a strange fruit growing from one of the nearby trees, and, of course, not knowing what it is at all, he decides to eat it. Because he's hungry. And hunger can justify a lot. I've played Until Dawn, I've seen what hunger can do to a person. Cut 20 minutes into the future, and we find Sonic and Rotor returning to discover that all of the plants have grown quite large in their absence. Tails states, in rather eloquent language, that it was he who caused them to flourish. It's quite simple, really. I created a new plant food based on the equation x equals the degree of sunlight times the amount of chromosomes divided by the process of photosynthesis. I see. So if we draw out the equation as he stated it, and then we add everything up as he said... Aha! I've solved it! It makes perfect sense! See? Look! Like I said, makes perfect sense. While Sonic initially thinks, and rightfully so, that Tails has been replaced by some sort of robot, Tails states that he gained his newfound intelligence after ingesting that strange fruit on the tree, and then we get a massive bit of info dump as Rotor informs us that the tree is the Mobius Tree of Knowledge, that he somehow found and transplanted to his greenhouse, and the fruit that Tails ate was the only fruit that he ever managed to get it to grow. The fruit apparently gives anyone who eats it super intelligence. So, in the span of a few panels, we have natural artifact of immense power, forbidden fruit, and super intelligent mutant fox. Got it? Good. No sooner has Rotor finished explaining all this than Antoine dashes in, saying that he, Bunny, and Sally were ambushed by one of Robotnik's machines while out for a stroll. Sonic dashes off to go and play hero, as usual, and we cut to Sally and Bunny running away from... Well, this is actually pretty cool. The machine attacking them is actually the exact same robot design used in one of the episodes of the Saturday morning cartoon. Yes, the coloring is drastically different. The version in the cartoon used much brighter hues of red and orange, but otherwise it's pretty much the exact same design. Pretty cool to see a bit more evidence of the comic actually being linked to the cartoon, if only by sharing the same sort of blueprints and design. Sally's about to collapse from exhaustion just as Sonic shows up, but before he can complete his no doubt awesome taunt, Tails flies in, showing off some rather impressive vocabulary that I personally would be impressed with if any of the kids reading the comic actually understood it. And he states that he will take down the metallic monstrosity. And he does so, kinda, tricking it into slamming its blades together and destroying them. And yes, that's definitely impressive, but he didn't actually destroy the robot's body or anything like that. The thing's still standing there, and I'm pretty sure it can be a threat even without its buzzsaws. But apparently those things were all that were holding it together because we never see the thing again. Tails gives some real long explanation about how he's so smart now, he can somehow move as fast as Sonic, and then states that because of his smartness, he is basically removing Sonic as the leader of the Freedom Fighters and taking over the position. We cut back to Knothole, which according to the backgrounds is no longer underground, but inside a rather nice-looking above-ground wooden house, where apparently they're all under attack from one of Robotnik's robots. Sonic charges in to blow it to smithereens, but his attacks just bounce off the thing. Turns out it's a new cleaning invention made by Genius Tails, who, now being a genius, is also, obviously, a douchebag. He even made himself a nice big #1 medal to commemorate the fact that he has basically made himself leader. Despite the others' attempts to dissuade him, he states that he's going to prove just how fit for the position he is by subduing their prime nemesis. And we cut over to said nemesis, where Tails is effortlessly evading all of his traps and robots and making his way towards Robotnik's control room. We don't actually get to see him doing any of that stuff, but it totes happened, promise. And then Tails just casually strolls into Robotnik's lair, demanding that he hand over his empire, and then conveniently the effects of the Fruit of Knowledge start to wear off. Just as Robotnik easily tricks the now not genius Tails into an obvious trap, we cut back to Knothole, where Rotor informs Sonic that the effects of the fruit are temporary, while Sonic is trying to look up the words that Tails was using before flying off. After a few panels with a dictionary, Sonic puts two and two together and quickly dashes off to save Tails. I'm going to assume that Tails disabled all the robots and traps and security on his way in, because Sonic doesn't seem to have any sort of trouble getting into the inner sanctum. Sonic, showing that he's not that stupid himself, attempts to bluff Robotnik by pretending that the metal Tails had made was a bomb. Robotnik, not one to fall for something so obvious, has Snively attempt to scan the metal, but as it was pointed out in a throwaway line I foolishly forgot to mention, the metal is a special alloy that can't be detected by Robotnik's machines, thus he can't prove that Sonic's bluffing. We'll just ignore the fact that it'd have to be a real impressive bomb to be hidden in what is essentially an oversized bottle cap, but whatever. This does lead into a rather impressive intense scene in which we see Robotnik threaten to blow the place up while Robotnik attempts to call the bluff, the two of them in a standoff with one another. It has a bit of a Western cinematic feel to it, but of course Robotnik caves, releases Tails, and then runs off with Snively in tow. Sonic and Tails run back to Knothole, where Tails has to endure a talking to from Antoine before scaring the poor guy onto the ceiling fixture, and we end with everyone else laughing at him. This is a pretty fun story, by no means original of course, but it's another growing point for Tails, and has a few good moments and some jokes that manage to get me to smile. Up next is an interesting little thing that I used to see all the time in the 90s. Certainly something that doesn't happen a lot nowadays, or if it does, I don't see it. Do-it-yourself Sonic. Apparently, the writers, Ken Penders and Mike Kantorovich, have gone on vacation, so they have this story all drawn out with dialogue balloons and everything, but they've got no dialogue. Oh, heaven forbid we aren't able to get our issue quota for puns. Anyway, the entire idea for this is that kids would write in their own dialogue and then send in their entries to Archie Comics. 2 winners would be chosen, and their entries would not only be printed in a future issue, but they'd also win, a subscription to the comic book, which they might already have. Can I take tour number 2, Bob? It's worth mentioning this, but I'm certainly not going to cover this as it is, and I'm debating whether or not I'll cover the winning entries when we get to them. It just seems kinda mean to poke fun at something that was actually written by what was no doubt a little kid at the time. So with that being said, let's move on to our next story.
Oh, girls just wanna have fun.
No copyright! Shit, I'm gonna have Madonna's lawyers coming after me with castanet chainsaws. That's something that lawyers do, right? Anyway, the second story begins with Robotnik playing with some defective action figures, which are actually marionettes, it looks like, of his enemies, and apparently the ones of the girls have some rather insulting things to say. Math is hard. My place is in the kitchen.
Don't ask me. I'm just a girl.
Robotnik seems inspired by the sexist remarks of these mass-produced products, and then Snively comes in. Playing with your toys again, my lord? No, of course not.
Did you see anything? No, sir. I didn't see you playing with your dolls again. Good!
Huh, this is becoming a very reference-heavy episode, isn't it? Anyway, Robotnik explains that since he can't beat the Freedom Fighters as a team, he'll separate them and pick them off one by one, and determines the best place to start would be with those he perceives to be the weakest of the team, namely, the girls. You can all see where this is going. Cut to Sally and Bunny spotting some rather bright spotlights out in the distance. The two of them decide to go and investigate, and I am not going to criticize Sally's decision this time, because she at least is going out with someone else, and that someone else is basically the strongest bodyguard the Freedom Fighters have in their ranks. However, the two of them find at the source of these lights the weakness of all females, the most insidious, horrifying of traps, the mall. Of course, it's not a real mall, and the two of them end up walking into an obvious trap, dropping right into Robotnik's clutches, where the dictator demonstrates an uncomfortable level of disrespect for one's personal boundaries. Lord knows where that hand has been, after all. His plan for using the two of them as bait, however, is cut short when the two of them proclaim proudly that they are capable of taking care of themselves. And then they demonstrate it, Bunny delivering a nice haymaker to the robot holding her, while Sally just straight up chucks one over her shoulder. And so we get a few panels of the two of them kicking 20 kinds of ass. It's pretty refreshing, actually, seeing the two of them doing this sort of thing, particularly Sally, who up to this point has done little more than complain, be captured, be stupid, and chew out other people without taking responsibility for her own screw-ups. And as Bunny points out, Sonic usually hogs all the fun, so it's always good to see other characters being proactive like this. With all the robots dealt with, the two of them set their sights on Robotnik. They finally have the tyrant where they want him, and they just tie him up and leave him with some politically correct versions of the toys Robotnik was playing with at the start of the story. Now they say things that wouldn't be out of place in a My Little Pony toy. What? Why are you cutting back to me? Yeah, I like the show, but I don't collect the merch. Stereotyping jerks. And we end on Sally and Bunny returning to Knothole, which is once again underground, having a laugh at Sonic clipping out some coupons in the paper. Men, that's all they think about. Fun, games, and shopping. I think about other things. I don't have a problem. I could quit whenever I want. Don't judge me. You judgy judger. When it comes down to it, I smile when reading this issue. It's fun, it's simple, and it's consistent, which, given the anthology nature of the series up to this point, that's a pretty big compliment. The first story had some good scenes, and while it introduces its MacGuffin out of nowhere, it does have some nice foreshadowing, and having another story more centered around Tails, and his want to be a bit more active on his own as a freedom fighter is pretty nice. It lays some nice groundwork for much later on when he'd become a more integral part of the team. The second story is a pretty by-the-numbers girl power story, but at least it doesn't go over the top with it. It doesn't drag down males in favor of making females seem more badass, instead just letting the two characters who are badass and who happen to be female run the show. Robotnik's chauvinistic behavior is over the top, yes, but everything about him is over the top, and he's already been portrayed as the absolute scum of the earth, so really nothing he does here can be considered out of character. Overall, a pretty strong issue for early in the Sonic mythos, and before long, we're going to start seeing a big change coming to the comic. Look forward to it.